Three, two, one. Welcome, Slink. Let's talk analytics. So let's talk about how teams are processing analytics, what we're seeing, what it doesn't seem like is being done, maybe as cleanly or professionally. And as someone who comes from an analytic background in professional sports, I've there's a huge similarity to analysis. There's a comment. It's something we were talking about earlier today. Is you could take like I could go grab analysts from who I worked with before who don't have a ton of knowledge about League of Legends. Give them parameters of what we're looking for, what type of stats we want to see, and within a couple days, even a week, they would be able to bring me very good analysis reports on what we're trying to do, especially in like something like a draft phase against who we're against, because we're giving them hard numbers. And you brought up a comment. You could almost bring it to them in the guise of their personal sport, and they would be able to tell you what's going on. It's something I'd like to get into today and talk about, where it seems like there's not a lot of experience maybe there. And is this something that you believe, like I do, they could fix with outside help? Because I really do believe if they brought in someone from even a traditional sport or a different type of analysis who has been doing this for a while to teach the people to do it, it's a lot easier to learn whatever sport or discipline you're trying to analyze than it is to learn how to analyze things properly.
Yeah, I think the outside help is needed just because knowing, as we know with these coaches, they have backgrounds in League of Legends per se. They're not all required to be challengers or even former pros for that matter, but they
Mm-hmm.
understand the game of League of Legends as people that we play the game, but we also have vast outside of this game experience and knowledge, be it in sports and in other industry. For those guys to be as good as they are, it doesn't leave a lot of time for the outside work. So we can't assume these coaches or even analysts have a very deep understanding of how to properly scout and analyze
Mm-hmm.
other teams' tendencies, performances of other players, and that is what they're missing. And I think why we can be a little critical of it is two reasons. One, in the LCS and in EU, with this one game match, it is super important because you only get the one shot. Over in Korea, they're playing best of threes. It's interesting because they can actually be a lot worse at analytics because they get that first game buffer. They get a game, they see what works, what didn't work, they can go make adjustments, come out with a new ban pick strategy for game two, and maybe take a game back, and then you got your rubber match. And then over here, you can't do that. You have to come in prepared with all your info from, be it scrims or, I mean, even watching a player stream and seeing what they like to do.
Yeah, definitely.
Any info you can get and put it into one game, one pick ban, and it puts a lot of pressure on them. And so it makes it seem to us like they're definitely underperforming when it comes to analyzing what the other team wants to do and what the other team is going to do.
Right. And I think that's part of the process, right? There's there's not a set process. It's just kind of like, hey, you were a really good player, so you can probably analyze games for us. But you're missing huge gaps in especially pick ban. Pick ban has been really crazy with that stuff. And you bring up a really good point in that maybe there isn't time or those things, but there's not a lot of data either. There's not as much data as a Korea, like you just mentioned, or China, because they're playing way more games. So you're getting much, much more data and much, much more video to look at, tendencies, to look at heat maps, to look at, KDA, CS differentials. Are they a lane pressure? Are they up in the lane? Does this jungler invade a lot? Do they like to start down here? Do they invade a lot as a team level one? Stuff like that. You have much, much more data. Whereas here, if a team does it once, you kind of have to put it on your board because you only get, like you said, one game. And that's where it becomes so jarring to me is I'm not an analyst for a team. I'm not a head coach for a team. I'm not getting paid to do something like that. If I was, though, I can guarantee you that there is no chance Viper would ever get Riven in one of my games. That's a clear cut thing. You could watch a stream of his forever, and if you're worried about one thing, I mean, is there any chance in the world he's as good on Urgot or Yorick as he is on Riven? No. No, there's not a chance in any world that he's as good as those two champs as he is on Riven. He's played thousands of games on Riven. And that is the type of thing that's just a glaring thing to me where how does that even happen? Okay, it happens one game. 100 Thieves doesn't ban him out and it gets picked because it's not something he's been picking when it has been available. But you have to have that in the back of your mind. But how do we get to the second game in the weekend when they go up against Clutch Gaming? It's interesting we're talking about two really poorly performing teams when this happened to. But again, you ban out Urgot, and he picks Riven again into your team. Now, he didn't have as much of an impact that game. He still had a very good impact as he did the first game. But how does that get through on Sunday? And I think that comes down to the process is not hard, right? You still need people who have knowledge of the game. And, you know, I understand the idea. I don't understand the idea. I'm sorry. I don't understand the idea. You know, I've seen some postings like, hey, we Diamond 2 and above players. That doesn't make them a good analyst. A good analyst is just a good analyst. It doesn't matter what type of data you're giving them. They know how to extract that stuff. But the hardest part, especially for me learning it, to do it in a different discipline, but it's the same idea. The hardest thing for me to learn was how to present that data so that the people could consume it much easier. I mean, I can throw all the stats I want at you, but they have so many more things to think about than just that. So when you're analyzing your pick ban stuff and you're bringing that stuff to your head coach, someone needs to get in there and teach them how to present that data properly. And, you know, hopefully down the road they get some people in there that can teach them how to do that. And then, like something we've talked about before, attaching video, being able to do that stuff, to look at those things. But it's easier for them to consume, because that was the hardest part for me, was learning how to do that. So my manager, my pitching coach, or my hitting coach, for instance, could look at the data they got in 15, 20 minutes and make a game plan for that day, because you're playing a game every day. These guys have a whole week to set this stuff up, but they're still not doing it properly.
Yeah, and then we don't know what's going on behind closed doors, and that's part of the issue with, you know, critiquing or analyzing or
Sure.
even, you know, giving advice if anyone were to ever ask, because we don't know. I don't know. Do they have team meetings? Do they have,
Sure.
you know what I mean? Do they watch video together? Because, you know, I know what I did in college when I played basketball, and there's no way, you know, we didn't watch the team we were about to play 2 or 3 times, videos of them, got to know their players, knew their name, knew their jersey number, for crying out loud, you know. And it makes you wonder, are these guys doing this? So I put myself, and we'll pick on Clutch Gaming a little bit here because they're the ones that allowed it to happen. But what you watched Viper's game, right? You have to assume that. We're going to make some basic assumptions. They are aware that FlyQuest played 100 Thieves. Viper got Riven and played well on it. So
Mm-hmm.
was the conversation A, Viper got Riven and only played well because Someday was on a really bad champ in Silas? That could be.
True.
Was the conversation, hey Hooney, Viper is a Riven main. We're going to let him pick it. Do you feel comfortable playing Scion into it? And Hooney saying, yeah, I got this. Okay, maybe that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Or were they just so focused on something else that they didn't realize Viper just tore up 100 Thieves on Riven, and they just allowed it to go through because they weren't prepared. Now, the third one might be the least likely, but it's the one that seems to be what happened, because Hooney did not control the Riven on
Nope.
Scion. He went 0-2. He just got destroyed. He was down 108 farm.
Mm-hmm.
So which of these things got through is the question. And we don't know. I say we know what happens in baseball and basketball because it's been around for years. The infancy of league doesn't allow us to understand, was it missed in a meeting? Do they have the meetings? Or who's responsible for bringing this info in? I mean, maybe Clutch's coach doesn't know Viper is a Riven main who's awesome. He
Which
might
is
not know
mind
that,
blowing.
you know, it could, but like I say, we're making assumptions and we can't know, but we have to ask the questions, because if this esport wants to become a mainstream sport and wants to be the big deal that it thinks it is, especially over here, this things like this can't happen. That it's just you can't allow it to happen, and you have to wonder why it happened.
And that's what we're talking about. And I do wonder why it happens. And yes, you're right. I am making some assumptions, but those assumptions are based off of basic analytical work, how you would analyze a situation. Like you said, we don't know what process. And when you gave the three examples, those are three great examples of did those happen in those meetings. We know they're having meetings, okay, because they've talked about them. I talked about it on another thing about their AMAs, right? They've been very upfront and honest about their AMAs, a little too upfront and honest about their AMAs. But they had
Right.
one of their analysts on there, giving some answers and stuff too. And he gave a great answer of how you become an analyst, right? He gave some great information to someone who asked about it. But reading that answer that he gave, do your own stuff on YouTube, send some stuff to us. If your analysts aren't great analysts and don't know how to analyze the people they're hiring, that's not going to help your situation either. If that's where your hiring pool is coming from, just people that send you random things in emails, that's fine if you have an established analytical background or an established video department or an established advanced report department. That's one of the things we talk about all the time. The hardest part of teaching new guys how to do the job when I was there, besides the video aspect of it, right, is the analytic part, the analysis part. It's not so much, bring your knowledge if you played, but that's another thing we talked about. Some of the best analysts I've ever met in my life didn't play baseball past high school or even in high school. You know what I mean? That doesn't decree or that doesn't decide how good you are at something like that, because how you bring those stats to the table and what you're seeing in those is something that is a completely different discipline than knowing the actual ins and out of the game. The head coach, the assistant coach, and the people around there, they're the ones that know the game. You're just bringing them the data in an easy way for them to consume, but you're also bringing in, like, you wouldn't need to know, for instance, that who Viper even is, right? But if you're one of the advanced report guys and you go back look at his solo queue history and who he is, even some of his streams, you just look up that player, that person, you know what I mean, who Viper is, and you see, wow, this guy played a ton of Riven, and you just bring that up in the meeting. And you explain to them the decision they make afterwards is what you're talking about. We don't know what they talked about or how they consume that information, but that's another process that there are plenty of people in this world, and especially when it comes to some of these teams that are owned by professional sports organizations. I mean, you could bring in one of their analysts just to show your analysts, this is how I do my day-to-day process. This is how I process this information. Do you think every analyst in every pro sport played that sport at a high level? No, they didn't. It's not even close. There's not enough people that played at a high level that want to do that afterwards. A lot of them wanted to go into coaching, or they want to go do something completely different. So looking at that, these mistakes are also magnified 100 times because of the one game series. You're playing 2 games a weekend, 18 games a split. It's really hard to watch them make simple mistakes like this, and it's costing you a loss. And next thing you know, you're like Clutch Gaming and you're 3-7. It's not all because of pick ban. There's a lot of in-game things going on, but those adjustments aren't being made. 100 Thieves is in the same situation, right? Their pick ban has not been great this season either. And what we're noticing from that stuff is Team Liquid that much more talented than 100 Thieves on a player-to-player basis? No, they're not. They're really not. Some days as talented as any top laner in NA or in the West, period. He might be the best top laner in the West individually. Bang is, well, we all know who Bang is, right? I mean, their mid laners definitely not as good as Team Liquid, in that situation. Their support, I wouldn't say Afram was as good as Core JJ. I don't think anybody would. Core JJ is the best support in North America right now. But you can't argue that Bang's not as good at 80 carry as Double Lift. And then the jungle situation, I would say Xmithy's a better jungler overall, but you're not looking at a team where it's like 5 guys are just clearly better than these 5 guys. So we have to look at it and go, well, this comes down to a coaching, setup, and preparation problem.
Exactly, the preparation. And the thing we're kind of making the point of is it can't happen on game 2 in the LCS, or day 2,
Right.
sorry, in the LCS. With the way League has gotten, these mistakes in day 1 can be understood. we got different patches, every 2 weeks. We're on patch 9.4
Yeah,
coming
it's a
up
huge
here in
problem.
week 6. So that means they've had two or three patches for 5 weeks. That affects a lot of what they're trying to do. So coming into day one, that's a whole week of scrims and practice and info and a new patch. You're going to make mistakes in your pick ban. There's going to be issues. Things are going to get through. Surprises are going to happen. That's why day two is so important. And that's why the mistakes that we kind of point out when we're reviewing this cannot happen on day two. You just can't make mistakes like that on day two. If you're going to lose a game, it's going to happen. Everybody loses. You can't lose because biffed on the pick ban on the second day, the most important day, because that's the only day you have all the info as opposed to day one. And it comes down to game prep and right back to analytics of being able to take the whole week leading up, seeing what they do with it in day one in a competitive match, their only competitive match of the week on day one, seeing what they did, and then adjusting to it for when you play them on day two. They didn't play you on day one, they played somebody totally different. You get a whole match to watch and make your adjustments for day two. And when you're not making the right adjustments, it's not because of lack of info available, it's lack of knowledge of how to process the info that we're seeing.
Exactly. And that's something, you know, that's fixable. That is completely
Very.
fixable. And you can get people in there. You're pretty big, companies at this point. You aren't, these small, like, indie kind of like, oh, the league's just starting out. We don't have a lot of infrastructure and money and stuff like that. Go hire one more guy who is whole entire job is to get ready for the next patch, because those notes go up on the surrender at 20 very early. They might change a little bit before they go, but then it hits the PBE, and then that patch is out usually almost 2 weeks before they start using it in pro play, right? Or a week and a half
Right.
at least.
At
So then
least a
they start
week and a
using
half.
it in pro play. Just have one person whose whole entire job is to get ready for that patch. Here's the changes. Here's what looks like is very powerful right now. And then you throw that into their hands the week leading up to that stuff. Like the situation right now, they were talking about it on the LCK, Rek'Sai, right? There's a big change with Rek'Sai, might be a power pick now. That's something you throw at someone like an X-Smithy, like, hey, we need you to play. That's part of that preparation process. But one of the mistakes you can't make as an analyst, as someone who is in charge of that situation, and the thing that would come down on me, for instance, if it happened during a game, is not having that information. If I gave you the information but it wasn't detailed enough, or I wasn't sure, or they didn't process it and use it, you know what I mean? Then okay, whatever. The information's right there. They just didn't see that was that big of a deal. But I can't, as an analyst or a video guy or doing that stuff, I can't not have that information for you. That is literally 100% of my job, is to find those things and to bring those to you, and then let people with the minds and who are getting paid to do that job, who are better in that situation to handle that information, to make those decisions. I'm not there to make decisions for them. They'll decide what that data means to them, but you can't not have the information, and that's what it looks like here. And it looks like someone's not coming into them going, here's your information. Not specifically with the Riven thing, that's just a gross oversight, but going into game one of the week, it seems like there is not that type of preparation. They're not getting enough information, the right type of information, and they're not getting it done properly where it's easy for them to consume and set up a game plan going into the week.
It really makes you wonder what kind of conversations these coaches and players are having, because we've talked about that before. What level of control do these coaches have? What level of respect do they have from their players? Because league's
Mm-hmm.
such a different environment than a sport.
Yeah.
A coach is hired. You look at the LA Rams, with their Sean McVay coach. He wasn't a player. He's not some Hall of Fame player. He couldn't even play football if you look at him. He's this little dude. But he has the respect of pretty much every guy on that team because of his mindset and what he knows and the schemes he runs offensively. Now Todd Gurley might argue a little bit with that, with how he was handled in the postseason, but that's a
Yeah,
different
definitely.
conversation.
Mm-hmm.
He made it to the big game as a 30 whatever he is, 6 34 32
31.
year old head coach. Yeah. So it's not necessarily always an age thing, but you wonder if these coaches are able to go in and tell the team, here's what we're going to do, because this game, you can't go play NFL football online and become challenger level on your own and then go to your coach McVay and say, so
Right.
how good are you, and whether or not you're going to listen to him. There's just no, it's such a separation. There's so much difference. But it seems from what we're seeing that maybe these coaches don't have the say. Yeah, I guess it's a choice of two things. Either the coaches have the say and they're making the wrong decisions, some of them, not all of them, but they're
Hmm.
just not making great decisions. They're all powerful and they're making bad calls, whether it be missing the ribbon thing, putting bang on Victor in week 1 or 2,
Right.
whichever it was, stuff like that. They're either making poor decisions with autonomy, or they're on those headsets asking guys, "Hey, what should we do? What do you want to do?
Right. And that's what I think
Do
it
you want to
is.
ban the ribbon?"
Hmm.
And if that's the case, then there is your problem. But you can't fix that until you have high level pro players done playing want to coach. Until Soaz retires and says, "Hey, I want to come back and coach this team," or until Elimination stops doing his analyst thing and says, "I'd like to come back and coach." Until that happens, what are you going to do? Because the available coaches out there aren't former really successful pros. They're, whoever they are. I don't know these guys. I don't know where they came from. I don't know why they're thought of as great head coaches.
Right.
They've just the guys that have always been the coaches. And Fnatic has shown that you can make it all the way to the finals of the biggest tournament in the world, and you don't need your coach the next year apparently, because he just got let go. So
Yeah.
where are they getting these people that they're calling coaches, and what's the requirement? Because you don't have enough former pro players that are really, really good pros that also want to coach yet. They're all still playing. And with how much money you can make streaming this game
Right. That's a big
constantly,
part of it.
why would you go coach when you can just sit at your house on the computer and stream and make thousands of dollars playing a game
Hmm.
instead of all the work that goes into coaching? And I think that's probably your biggest problem, is the pool of talent to pull from coaching isn't large enough yet that you can, bring a lot of quality in for the whole league. You can get 2 or 3 coaches, but there's 10 teams. You need 10 quality coaches, and I don't think they have 10 quality coaches in the LCS right now.
Yeah. And it's the whole entire thing is very odd. It's a new thing. There's been esports for a while. That's not new in that
Nope.
sense, but nothing like this, obviously, with professional leagues and franchises, and it's not going anywhere. We get it. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But you bring up a great point with that stuff. Like the McVay thing's is a good example. Tomlin from years ago too. He won his Super Bowl at what 34 or something like that.
Yeah, he was
But
really young. Yep.
so you look at it that way, and you look at someone like McVay. He did play college football, right? We've seen the highlights and stuff. He's a
Yeah.
decent college
Yeah.
football player and stuff like that. But he wasn't a high level player, right? Bill Belichick wasn't a high level player.
He
I
got
mean,
hurt in college. Yeah, he didn't even
mhm,
make the pros either. He
right?
broke his leg snapping in
Hmm.
college and never played again.
Exactly. So the idea that you do need to have some knowledge of the game, I do agree with. I think it from the coaching and analytical part of it, I think it helps. It obviously it helps, but I think there's a level of it hurting too. Like, well, this is the way I did it, you know what I mean? But that might not be the best way to do it because it wasn't very
Right.
successful. So coaching is a talent in and of itself, just like playing is a talent in and of itself. But what you bring up with the age thing is really important. I think some of these teams, they got someone in there who's older, who maybe doesn't need to be like someone who knows the game a ton, as an assistant coach or a GM, for instance. Like, where are the GMs and all of this stuff? It seems like the GM is more of like a corporate entity there in those
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah.
But like a player development manager, right? Someone who's in charge of both the academy team and the big league team when it comes to player personnel, dealing with players, like a situation where I'm not saying Hooney did this, but the game where they decided to go the Zillion top with the frostbite,
spell thieves.
yeah,
Yeah.
the spell
Yeah.
thieves and klepto thing. Maybe that happens, and maybe you get back in the thing. And like I said, I don't know if Hooney did this. I'm just using this as an example of a hypothetical. where they're on the stage and the coach said, "Hey, we're not doing that," and he's like, "No, no, no, it'll work," and he just locks it in, right? And the team locks it in, even though the coach isn't 100% on board with it. That's where a GM or a player development manager comes in and is like, "You're not doing that. You're not playing next week. That's it. That's We're not arguing about it. We're not doing this thing. There needs to be a level of respect. There needs to be a level of listening to the process of what we're trying to do here as a team, because it's not an individual game. It's the same situations you run into with players. The NBA, we always relate it to the NBA because there's 5-on-5 and stuff like that. But it's very similar in that sense that if a player's not on page with what the coach is doing, then you're going to have so much disjointing. It's going to be so disjointed during the game. Calls are going to be a mess. And we see it in professional sports all the time. Look at the Golden State Warriors. Yeah, they have Steph Curry and all that stuff. They have great players there too, but they are all in on what Kerr is telling them to do. Steph Curry isn't out there going, "Oh no, that's a bad play. I'm doing this." You know what I mean? That's stupid.
Mm-hmm.
He's not doing that. If he tells them to do it, he's just going to go do it. And if it doesn't work, then maybe they sit down later and go, "Okay, I didn't like doing that because of this and that." That's how you process that stuff. It doesn't seem like that process is going there. It seems like it's just an amalgamation of everybody just kind of like talking at once. And I think there is an age gap in that sense where you bring in, let's look at Faker, right? Let's look at Faker. He's the most prominent league player of all time. But if he was in a regular sport, he'd still be considered like in his early career. He's 22 years old. He's 22. A lot of your good stuff, a lot of stuff for coaches that comes with that stuff is life experience. 31 from 22 is a huge gap for someone like McVay. There's a lot of years there he spent learning from other people as an assistant coach or as that stuff. And like you said, they haven't had that time for someone to do that, right? But you can bring other people in who have done other things in other areas that are similar to help these guys learn those life experiences. How to talk to a player, how to have control of your players without being disrespectful and losing your players and losing the clubhouse. There's a lot of that stuff that I think is fixable going forward. And there's a lot of these teams have a direct access to someone who can help them do that, like Golden Guardians and Clutch Gaming.
Yeah, they're set up for success. There's just that gap between what's the norm. Gaming still isn't the norm. Like you brought up with the corporate just being an entity, there isn't any corporate people at Echo Fox that are paying attention to the gameplay of Echo Fox. Even Rick Fox going to the games, he's happy when they win. He's not going in the quote unquote locker room and hollering, at Phoenix for missing, abilities or whatever.
Sure.
It's just, that's not happening. Now maybe the coach could, but so it's such a disconnect that you don't know how many resources are being pumped into them, given to them for this stuff that should be. And I think it is, because we have evidence of teams having team psychologists. DeFicio is on and has done an interview talking about how many coaches and assistants that they have for
and
his
Weldon,
team.
The famous Weldon. Now he's a coach.
He's a coach. Yeah, absolutely. And it's where you pull in this stuff from, as we've said. They don't have, and they'll get there. I mean, whoever has a really successful season this year, if they want to copy what other sports do, Team Liquid's, draft analysis and their assistant coach should both have head coaching jobs next year at other organizations that weren't as successful. That's just the way the world works. That's the only way you're going to get experience doing it.
Agreed.
And they haven't had that, because I don't even know why. I thought I had a thing to say there, but when you get relegated like they used to, or in certain areas you can, once you're not going to take an assistant coach from a relegated squad and give them a head coaching job somewhere else. So
no,
that's not going to work. And you don't want to be, assistant coach for a team that just made it to Worlds, leave that organization to go head coach a team that's down, in the Challenger Series either. So that's kind of a trick. It's the same deal in soccer, over in the BPL. How far does an assistant coach want to drop to get a head coaching job? I
Usually have
guess
to
is the
drop pretty
question.
far.
Yeah, and you do, but and that's an established sport. There's a lot of money we're talking about
Hmm.
here that they're making that can make up for the fact that your team sucks, because that's what guys end up doing. You have to take the payday to go lose essentially, and that's kind of the road they're going to have to go down, I think, for the coaching thing. But for the analytics, it's an effort thing, and like you've pointed out, it's finding the talent and not necessarily somebody that's a challenger level league
No.
player. It's just someone that is good at analyzing the state of the game, the meta,
Hmm.
maybe even someone with the ability to predict what the other team might do. That's an important part of it as well as baiting. We see that in Korea a lot. You can just tell when one of those teams baits the other team into picking
Oh
something.
yeah, yeah,
And
big
then
time.
they just hammer them the whole game on that pick. And you're like, wow, that was what a bait that was. They wanted him to pick that champ
Yep.
from the night before, and you see that because they play 3 game series and they probably have somebody looking at that, whereas maybe on our side of the pond here, we're not as invested as is brought up in the AMA that you brought up. Then there might not be that investment by the players and or the coaches. I know he brought up the players in that AMA, but it's also you got to look
Oh
at the
yeah,
coaches and
I
how
agree.
invested they are and how much time they're willing to put in, because they're not putting in enough, as evidenced by the ribbon miss on Viper.
Yes.
If you're putting in a lot of time, you might have to put in just a little bit more if you're still missing that. You don't need to work 24 hours a day, but you got to catch that. And like I said, not to pick on Clutch Gaming, because everybody has had a misstep in a draft here and there. There ain't no perfect teams. Even
No,
Team Liquid lost, and they lost because they did have a pretty crappy draft in the game they
it's
lost.
terrible.
So it is the issue. It is the thing, because you have to remember, even though we do compare this to all these other sports, this is more like soccer than it is basketball. There's no coaching, and it's even not like soccer because they have
Agreed.
halftime. There's
Hmm.
no chance for these coaches, once these teams are set, to say anything.
Yeah.
They can't look at that draft and say, oh crap, okay, here's what we thought was going to happen. Now guys, you need to do this. No, they walk them off the stage, they
Yep.
shake hands,
They
and they're
got 30
gone. They're not
seconds
on
to explain
comms
it.
with them.
They got 30
Yeah,
seconds to explain it, and that's not enough time to do that stuff. And
absolutely.
I think that's a great point to this, and that's why your analytics are so much more important, right? That's why they're
Yes.
so much more important, because you can't get it wrong to start. It's so many games are decided in pick ban right now, and that might be part of the meta. That might be part of the game. I mean, we call it the meta all the time, but it's not just the meta of the champions you're picking. It's how the game is changing all the time. I mean, the jungle XP changes just happened a little while ago. Those were massive sweeping changes. You know what I mean? That changed the whole entire outlook of how the game is played, how junglers
Yes.
path. They need to be in lanes ganking 24/7 now if they want to keep up in levels. I mean, there's so many times where you come out of the jungle at level 4 and you're fighting over Scuttle Crab and their mid laner's level 6, and you're going, what in the hell is going on right now? So it changes the whole entire process of it, and that's why your analytics are so important. And it really doesn't seem like a lot of teams are doing a very good job at getting those processes set up. And there's a clear cut situation to bring someone in. They don't even need to know League of Legends, but how to do analysis properly, how to spend your time properly, how to spend your resources properly, your effort. How many hours of the day do you need to be doing this? You need to be doing it all the time. And we talk about it all the time. There's a lot of nights where I'm up at 4, 5 in the morning trying to get a advance report done because something changed, or oh, that guy got hurt. The day before the game, we get, or the 4 or 5 hours before a game, they scratched their starter. I got to do a whole new report on a pitcher who just got brought in. I got to go find as much stuff as I can, and I got to be prepared to do that in those situations. And that's what it comes down to. It comes down to that preparation, and it comes down to that situation. And I really do believe this. The first NA team, I mean EU, we've seen some. They've had some success starting last year. Internationally, some really good success. Obviously, going to the final, but that's one team. The first NA team, I think you're going to see that or EU team that really starts to dominate on a year-to-year basis and really has a chance at doing some damage at Worlds is the team that starts doing this stuff properly, gets a little more strict with how they're running their organization, a little more strict with time management, you know, a little more strict with practice schedule, with meetings, with analysts, with this is what you're going to play up in the top. This champion's too powerful. I don't play that champion. Well, you're going to learn. Like, you don't have a choice. You know what I mean? You need to learn this stuff. We saw it happen at Worlds with the Echo pick into Bwipo, right? We saw it with the Licorice thing. Was that the right decision there? I mean, according to the commentators, Papa Smithy was talking about it the whole time. That's a good counter to that situation, right? Was that a good counter to that situation? In that situation, no, it was awful. But again, that's preparation. That's you looking at it going, okay, this is a counter pick, but can our top laner execute this pick? That's part of your analysis process. This is not just the head coach. It's definitely not the player in that situation. That is part of your analysis. That is part of your assistant coaches. That's part of the people who are in charge of that stuff. And that's what it kind of seems like. A head coach has to wear so many hats at these organizations, right? They have to be the pick band guy, the analysis guy. You talked about Fnatic with Dylan Falco, right? It seemed like Dylan Falco was kind of their draft guy. Young Buck's their head coach. Dylan Falco's their preparation. Those Fnatic teams, besides the IG when they just got outplayed, they were so prepared for those games. They were prepared. They were ready. Was Echo going to come out? It looked like they knew Echo was coming, and they were ready to stomp it. Bwipo was ready to get after that. He was prepared for that matchup. And that's where someone like a Falco thinks, and we talk about it. Fnatic starts out really bad. They're playing a lot better now, but they start out really bad. That is 100%, obviously, you losing your mid laner, but even more importantly, I believe it was them losing Falco because he was their preparation going into those games. And that's where I think these teams can really, really go find these people or find someone to teach their people a little bit better stuff about that, but also get them more life experience just in general of how to handle themselves with these teams and with these players.
Yeah, 100%. Fnatic's the perfect example to back up, what we're talking about. If anyone were to think we're just spouting off with no knowledge, Fnatic is the poster child because they lost that person in the exact role that we are talking about its importance. And then they've just been crap.
Right.
It's direct correlation. It's a team that arguably, I guess, the way they finished was the number 2 team in the entire world. Couldn't win a match in the LEC for the first, 4 weeks of this split.
Yep.
Because of they lost a really good player, but they lost that analytics coach and
preparation.
It's absolutely important, and they're proving it right in front of your eyes. And they're like you said, they're playing better, they're coming around, and maybe they're learning a little more about preparation and how to effectively do it. But you can tell what happens when the person in charge of your preparation and your draft just leaves. It's chaos, and that's how important that is.
Exactly. Thanks for joining me, Slink. We will see you later.